I think after Series 2, I expected there to be a third series. I think after Series 1, that was the big wait, you know, in anticipation.
We knew that a lot of things had to change, you know. We were very unhappy with the sets, with the sort of painting of the sets and things like that. I mean, everything was like ocean grey or military grey. My memory of Series 1 and 2 is all very much black and white, because it was there was very little colour, you know. Even though I was wearing Hawaiian shirts, they'd been distressed to such a level that it was just sort of grey.
We wanted to give it a different look, and we were in a different position. We weren't so much bystanders. We were aware of some of the directions that had been given for the sets on the first series, which was Ed wanted it to be a grey submarine look. And that sounded fine, you know, from being on the outside, but then it wasn't really a grey submarine look, it was a grey kind of wooden TV set look.
Series 3, in all areas, it was a sort of big lift, you know, in all departments, really.
Mel wasn't available for those early series, and then he became available for Series 3. So Rob and I were very enthusiastic for getting him on board, and we had a long talk with him at the beginning, and we talked about our influences being Alien, and he took that on board and seemed to have a plan where, with no money, he could give us a look that was incredibly more on screen than anything we'd had so far.
My name is Hudson. I am the replacement.
You used to look around the set when we first got into it and went, that's a bread delivery box. That's what you'd realise. It was actually, you know, the things when they deliver bread from the supermarket, the big plastic tray, and you go, but that's, you know, and it looks like the grid at the side of a high-tech spaceship that's pressed out of titanium that's been mined on the planet for fur.
That's all it was. It was bits of wood with holes in with light through, as opposed to just bits of wood with no holes in. And there was a kind of genius to what he was doing with no money.
I think Mel produced a working set for us that really took Red Dwarf into its next sort of step.
So it started to have more of a space age feel about it, I suppose.
Well, I just think the whole thing, it just looked glossier, you know. I think every series of Red Dwarf has its own identifying features, but I think it all started with a big kick on Series 3.
I mean, a lot of people are very nostalgic and sort of misty-eyed about, oh, the first couple of series of Red Dwarf, they were my favourites, you know, when you could see this, you know. It was never supposed to be like that. It wasn't supposed to be like Prisoner in Cell Block H in space, do you know what I mean? It wasn't supposed to be bang a door and see the set move.
It had a sort of a solidity in its look, which was really advanced us forward, I think, a great deal.
Rob and Doug came in as producers, and it was a more relaxed feel, because they'd started out as one of the lads, you know. Although it did quickly become a them and us scenario with Rob and Doug as well, you know. But it was a lot easier to deal with than Paul's style of producing.
No,
I'm trying my best to be very diplomatic.
That's very good. No.
They knew right from day one, before Series 1 was ever shot, exactly what they wanted to see. But obviously they're writing it, and you know, they have to go through the mechanics of the television world, and sort of various departments have to do their thing. But I think once they got control, they could really fine-tune the whole look of the programme, the whole feel of it. And I think that's what you saw in Series 3.
I can understand people wanting to, you know, have their own, you know, ideas and views of how their work should be done. So I'm one of the sort of pro do-it-yourself guys anyway. So I wasn't really bothered, because, you know, I mean, my confidence in them was already high. You know, they'd broken enough ground.
And Paul Jackson's role was slowly becoming less and less and less, which was no bad thing really, because so Paul would just come in and shout at us most of the time, do you know what I mean? Try and scare us into like being funny.
I'm just doing my job. It's not my fault if I love it.
You can't really work in with that sort of pressure sometimes. I'm not saying that we didn't need it sometimes, because we were all very young men, and we were all just becoming very famous and moderately wealthy, and we weren't handling it the best a lot of the time. You know, we were going out and buying things that we shouldn't buy, and sort of we were very late. We had terrible problems with timekeeping, and Paul was psychotically anal about people being late. He hated you being late.
You know, there is the other side that isn't really maybe stated enough, is that, you know, Craig and Dan were young and pretty tough to handle, and discipline and punctuality and all the things that, you know, you kind of need to make anything kind of work. They weren't completely, you know, full on great at that. And they did need a bit of, you know, someone saying you need to arrive on time. I mean, it didn't need to be, you know, the kind of Alex Ferguson hairdryer treatment, which they got frequently. But, you know, in the end, I mean, Craig certainly is never late now, is always punctual. In fact, with Danny, I think we should bring Paul back and get him to have a word with him again.
Miss Jane!
The character had been auditioned, as it were, in an episode by another actor. So that character was something we thought would really work well. To work as a runner, it was then finding the right person to do it.
I think the way I got the part of Crichton was from being in a play at the Edinburgh Festival in 1988 called Mammon, Robot Born of Woman, which had absolutely nothing to do with Crichton, although there were some seeds I can now see of a sort of Crichton-esque behaviour in that play, and which is a play I wrote. It was just a two-hander play, which was very successful. And Paul Jackson, who was then the producer of Red Dwarf, saw that play, and he came up to me after I had worked with him before, and he said, "Oh, it's very good, Robert, lovely," and then disappeared. Didn't sort of think anything of it. And then it must have been about 6 or 7 months later, he rang up and said, "Do you want to come in and talk to these guys that do Red Dwarf?"
Well, I mean, to be honest, I really thought that, after seeing David Ross play Crichton, and then, we were told this other bloke was coming in to do Crichton, it was like, poor guy, this guy's going to die a death,
I did ask, and the irony of that so cruel, I did actually ask if I'd be recognisable as the robot, because I was worried about that, because I was also working on another project about robots, and I didn't want to be, and this is the actual quote, typecast as a robot. It was just, those words came back to haunt me many times, and Rob Grant, in his inimitable way, said, "Don't worry, Bobby, no one will recognise you."
But if people see my face, what are they going to think?
Tell them you had an accident. Tell them you took your car to the Crushers and forgot to get out.
Because of his comic timing and his malleability and his expressiveness, it was really, no contest. He was fantastic.
And I just thought at that stage I'd be wearing a kind of RoboCop helmet. You'd sort of be a thing over there, and maybe some funny costumes with lights on. And then at lunchtime I'd take the helmet off and go and have lunch with everybody else. I had no idea what I was being let in for. So that was basically how it started. And I think I did do some peculiar walks for them at that stage, which was only slightly embarrassing in that one of them I called my Douglas Bader Special, which I said you could walk like a mechanical walking machine that had limited joints. And so I walked with kind of stiff knees. You have to kind of use your hips to walk, which was fine, and they laughed and they thought that was funny. And then at that time I'd never met Doug before. Who has one false leg, as I'm sure many people know, and I sort of did my silly walk, and I was even doing squeaky sounds as I did it, and then at the end they all got up and shook my hand, and Doug walked over to me, and I thought, he's not taking the piss, is he? That's, and I thought, well, that's, and I remember walking out there going, what a shame, because that would have been really good fun to do that job, but I've totally blown it.
Stopping distances. You're travelling half the speed of light. What is the stopping distance?
4 years, 3 months.
And the thinking time?
A fortnight.
And Robert gave us the idea, gave us the chance to have like exposition on legs in a way, because that's where Norman's part really was to set up the plot, give him a couple of gags, set up the plot. Everyone goes, oh wow, and Crichton could do that, but he had legs and he could come onto planets with us, and he could interact with us far better.
I mean, it was instantaneous kind of acceptance. It was very rapid, and the cast are such a laugh that you kind of got sucked into it very. I don't really remember kind of an awkward morning where I didn't feel part of it. It was really quick. It was very quick absorption into that group.
We could talk at length about Robert as a a chap in terms of, you know, the whole Crichton character, but I don't think there's many people who could play Crichton. I mean, in retrospect, yes, it's easy to say that now, I mean, because he's made the part so much his own, but I mean, boy, oh boy, I've never met a man with so much patience, you know.
I tried all these different walks when we were first talking about it in the rehearsal studio without the costume on, all sorts of silly walks, and actually what defined the walk was the costume. I mean, it was quite restrictive because your shoulders were held really rigid and your legs were held rigid. You eventually just, I'm only bloody walkers like that.
I just thought I'd give your quarters a quick tickle around, sir. I won't take a jiff.
Was they didn't want Crichton to sound like C-3PO or Marvin the paranoid android from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was kind of English butler, you know, in whatever sense of voice, which I could have done sort of, well, Mr. Lister, so, you know, it would have worked in a sense. And then I remember trying to read it in with a French accent. That was very rapidly rejected. A Swedish one, which lasted quite a long time, so which was sort of, I think I'd done a kind of comedy character on stage who spoke a little like this and had the sing-song voice. And, you know, there was, hello, my name is Crichton. You know, it was quite fun. But then Craig started hitting me and he said that would drive everybody mad. You know, it was kind of, it would be very hard to sustain it. It was like in one line it got a laugh, but to keep it going all the time.
They must have gone through every accent in the world in rehearsal with Doug and Rob, you know, and, you know, how many more, you know, there's 75 silly walks you can do, you know, and they must have covered them all, you know, and Robert at the end of it was still patient. About 3 hours before, I would have stormed through a window and gone and left the planet probably, you know, but, you know, Robert was sitting there sort of going, right guys, so let's go back to 35, voice 35, walk 100. Is that a good combination? Let's try it again anyway. Let's try it for the 73rd time.
And at that time, I'd spent quite a lot of time in Vancouver, in British Columbia, in Canada, and I found that accent really intriguing, my crude analysis is it's quite strongly influenced by a Scottish accent, but it's kind of American Scottish, because they do say words like hoose. Let's go out of the hoose, or they say out of the hoose. But with so originally it was meant to be like that, but as many British Columbians have pointed out, quite vociferous to me in the following years, I don't have anything that resembles a Vancouver accent, but that was where it was my idea of it.
I've lived a long and relatively interesting life. The only truly terrible thing is that, as my adopted owner, you have to die with me. You what? Joke. Deadpan mode.
He added yet another type of energy that you know, helped Craig, myself, and Danny and Hattie along.
I mean, I think they must have explained to me, but if you've never had it done, you don't really know. So they said, you know, we're going to cover your head in plaster of Paris, and you've got to sit very still, but you can breathe through a straw stuffed up your nose, you know. So you go, oh yeah, fair enough, carry on, until they go, you know, on your face, and it is kind of it's an unusual experience.
I wanted to get a lot of angular features on the face, keeping it flesh-toned and flesh-looking.
I thought they were making a mould so that they could then make the helmet. I was still sure it was going to be a helmet that would fit really well. It would be a really high-tech thing with lights and buzzy things on it. And then I went in and they showed me this sort of square rubber head. And they did talk about that, you know, that we could do a line here and lines there. And, you know, they were kind of looking at my face and working out how to do it and drawing on the mould, you know, on the actual cast of my head. And I was very interested in what they were talking about. But then when I first saw the rubber mask, I went, I see. It does go all over.
We'd already had Hattie playing a female Holly before in an earlier episode in an earlier series. So she seemed a natural choice.
I got a call from my agent saying that they were auditioning for a new Holly because Newman wasn't doing Series 3. So I thought, oh, what? You know, it was exciting.
Well, Hattie was a lot less of a shock, really, because she'd played Hilly. And so we'd actually seen her, you know, be Norman, or the female version.
They gave me a bit of the script to read. There was Ed, Rob and Doug there, and they said, can you read this? So I read it, and then they said, no, out loud.
What's the time period?
Well, it's difficult to pin it down exactly, but according to all the available data, I would estimate it's round about lunchtime, maybe 1:30.
I think they auditioned about 10 people that day, I think, because I can read upside down, so I was reading down their list. And some people were quite proper, what I'd say proper actors, whereas I'd just done stand-up.
Once Crichton came, the part of Holly really changed. I thought Norman's Holly was was, you know, really funny. He had some great lines. He had some great big scenes. But Crichton took over that role. So the Hattie's role as Holly was much more reduced and a lot less funny. She had a lot less to do, really, because Crichton was doing all the exposition.
It was actually good to have a female voice on the show, you know? Sounds odd to say that, but it really actually just tempered a little bit of the sort of male domination.
They weren't black holes.
What were they?
Grit. 5 specks of grit on the scannerscope.
Yeah, the first episode we filmed for Red Dwarf III, the night before I was still at the Edinburgh Festival, because there was a party, and I thought, oh, should I go to that? I went back to the flat and I thought, no, I'll just nip to the party for an hour or so, it won't make a lot of difference. So I got all dressed up in my blue 50s cocktail dress and high heels and everything, and I went along to this last night party, and the person I was sharing a flat with was there and everything, and then all of a sudden he wasn't there, and so I didn't say goodbye to him. So then I went back to the flat and realised I hadn't got my front door keys. And I just sat on the doorstep all night until the taxi arrived at 6 in the morning because I couldn't get in. And he said, have you got any luggage? And I went, yeah, but it's all in the flat. So I turned up, well, I came to Heathrow, got a cab to Acton and turned up in the rehearsal room with me 50s cocktail dress, lovely blue and black cocktail dress, high heels and makeup smeared all over the shop. and they just like went, they really thought I was completely mad.
So sort of Hattie and I were like the 2 new children at school, a bit nervous.
We also got Howard in, and Howard gave again a kind of a more, I think, realistic kind of textured feel to the clothes and the costumes.
Howard started using a lot of sort of heavier fabrics, sort of real fabrics like suede and leather, as opposed to cotton and nylon and all that kind of stuff.
Hang on, wait a minute. Nod.
In the book, you know, think about the art school background, I took the fact that he would do, you know, he'd customise his own jacket.
You're so smart. I'm glad I came with you. Well, we are the smart party. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I just came to do the Red Dwarf Shuffle. He's smart. He's smart.
Just sat on a list are so much better than Hawaiian shirts and nylon boots, you know. Captain Emerald. He looked like, I thought it was good though, although everyone, he hated it. But it looked like something out of Captain Scarlet, do you know what I mean?
Essentially, it was to have that sort of, the hologrammatic look. It was to help show that he was a hologram. We used fabric that was two-tone, that had a different shine. The H became more sophisticated on his head.
The good thing about Howard coming in was, you know, that person now wants to say, right, I want to make my mark on it. And the only way to make your mark on the cat is to go one step further.
Yeah, we've been everywhere. 14 moons, 2 planets. I've been so worried, I haven't buffed my shoes for 2 days.
The best thing about Cat was trying to get the cat movements. In the first 2 series, there was a lot of where he'd go up on his haunches and it'd be... so we wanted a lot of swagger and a lot of attitude with him.
Well, if you put it like that, I guess you're right. Damn my vanity.
Obviously, it was the first time that Crichton was coming into the main character. Now, he'd been established in a previous episode, a previous series, when he was a butler. But obviously, he was this mechanoid character, so I took the metal element.
Myself? Well, that's a bit of a balmy notion, if you don't mind my saying so, sir.
The idea being that if you peeled off his suit, he would look exactly the same underneath, like an action man.
Hey, if you can't stand the heat, vacate the cooking area. In or out. Okay, I'm in.
At that stage, I think it had a very rigid groinal section, so I couldn't sit down without being unbolted for a while. Because yes, as Craig pointed out, it was my big fat bum that always broke it, but I think it had Velcro originally down the sides, and then I only had to move slightly, it would go, it would just fall apart. So then it actually had sort of bolts to hold it all together.
The first series we all flew, but people tended to miss planes on quite a regular basis, mentioning no names at all. But week 3, when Craig had missed it every single week, you know, it was decided that our pre-record days were getting shorter and shorter, and we would all go up on the bus the day before.
I know Craig was delayed one flight because he had bullets in his hat, and they wouldn't let him through. And they were constantly being late, and then it was like, okay, you're not old or mature enough to get planes on your own. We're going to escort you to a bus and drive you up.
It was like, you know, the sort of Sunday afternoon coach ride to the football match with, you know, crates of beer and videos to take us on. So, but we always used to watch like science fiction ones.
Oh, marvellous it was. Oh, what an exotic trip.
We used to fly up there before, and it was quite weird actually. The more popular the series got, the worse our transport got. I didn't quite understand that.
And we'd arrive there horrendously late. We'd do a camera rehearsal, get in the bus, drive up to Manchester. So we get out into the hotel at kind of 1 a.m, and I'd go to bed, and Craig and Danny go out clubbing, you know.
Well, we did the whole of Series 3 with a hangover, basically. I mean, especially the Friday, was just all in the blare, really. Because we'd go out, you know, and Danny, John Jules would be taking me to places like Moss Side, to all these like shebeens, and we'd be taking Norman Lovett with us in Series 2. So by Series 3, we were well established on the hacienda Manchester scene, man. You know,
we bonded more, I would imagine, during the evenings out in Manchester. We had a good laugh, and it's a great city up there to go out for the night. And we were in our 20s, and we did what people in their 20s would do in a city like Manchester after a hard day's filming.
It's party time!
Don't forget the Hacienda was open then, so because it was a long time ago. And it was just down the road. So very often I had been known to go to the Hacienda to find out if the boys were still there.
So we'd be getting in at 5 a.m, thinking we've got 5 hours before our 10 o'clock call, and Robert going to work at 5 to get into the match, so that when we arrived at 10 o'clock he was ready. So we kind of felt very sorry for him.
Poor Robert, though, you know. In those days, it used to take 3 or 4 hours to put his makeup on. So he'd have to, you know, get up at crack of dawn, 5 o'clock in the morning out, and we'd be sort of coming in. Dun, 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 dun.
We used to sleep through rehearsals the next day. We'd be blocking it on camera, and you know, people, okay, Craig, you go over there, and all right, in a daze, you know. But by the time the live audience came in the day after, we were, well, you know, because we were all there. We'd rehearsed it all week, so that first night in Manchester was a good way of letting your hair down. It was great for sort of team spirit as well.
When we'd finished the shoot on you know, whatever it was, Friday night, we'd all get back in the bus after the recording, and it was always me last, because it took so long to get the makeup off, so that the whole bus would be waiting outside the studio, from everybody inside already, like that, and I'd get on with my bags, oh, everybody, eyes held open with tape, you know, trying to keep going. And then the mad drive back, where you would hear classic showbiz anecdotes from Danny, or motoring facts from Chris Barry. You could get some great ones of those.
Acton was where most of the BBC shows used to rehearse. I mean, it was a series of floors with kind of like a gym floor and baseball nets, which were used as kind of to work out where doors were, and on white tape, and chairs, and they were very dull, very boring. I hated Acton. It was hell to get to, and I didn't think it gave the actors any sense of where they were or what they were doing.
I always remember there'd just be all these different things that should have been props that actually weren't. It was just anything that was there, because they didn't have the real props to mess around with, because they were up in Manchester, and we did the rehearsals down in Acton. So it'd be like picking up a banana and going, you know, death to you type thing, and they're going, sorry, is the banana, is that a ray gun or is that my hat? You know, and just like everyone would lose track of what all these props were.
We'd be in the lift with people like Ronnie Corbett and things like that. You know, they'd be rehearsing the 2 Ronnies while we're rehearsing Red Dwarf on another floor and all that. I remember once, after a heavy night, I remember, this is a true story, after a really heavy night, I'm in the lift with Robert, and I faltered, which was, you know, it wasn't very nice because we'd been very, 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 very drunk the night before. And I let one go, and I looked around, and Ronnie Corbett was standing behind me. Now, Ronnie Corbett genuinely is tiny, you know. And he's about exhaust pipe height, if you know what I mean. And he got the full front of it. And he got out on floor 2. So we thought, oh, didn't think of it. But then we found out that he was rehearsed on floor 5. So it was so bad. He got out on floor 2 and walked up the stairs. But I was so embarrassed. Ronnie Corbett, I mean, we were young and he was a comedy god, you know. The two Ronnies are like, wow.
I had a medical appointment and I took a brief history of time with me to try and attempt to read. And I was determined, I knew I was going to be waiting ages. And so I thought, I'm going to read this, speed read this for an hour and a half and see if I understand any of it. I mean, obviously the mathematics I understood those completely. But there was a couple of things that really stuck in my mind. And one was this Hawking's theory that it was perfectly possible for the universe to go forwards and then hit the big crunch, and then time rewinds and goes backwards, back to the Big Bang.
It was devastatingly difficult because I mean, you just got sucked into the discussion. You know, wait a minute, Lister's got the black eye now. It's getting slowly worse as he comes up to the point where the man unpunches him. Wait a minute, no, but he's still got the tooth. Oh, is he? Oh no, he's got to have the tooth sucked back in. He's going to have his tooth knocked back in before he goes through or does that happen after he goes through the window? And it was because although you don't shoot those things in sequence, we had to have all that kind of makeup and stuff the right way around. Otherwise, we'd sort of do the tooth and then, oh my God, he's still got the black eye, but not the tooth. You know, it just took hours and a lot of stressed directors walking around, scratching their heads.
In those days, I think there was 2 videotape machines at the BBC that would run backwards. So it was really, really difficult to try and visualise any of this stuff because you could only get certain time to work on those machines. I mean, now it's a piece of cake, but then the only way really that I could tell if anything was worked backwards was to go out and film on my DV. It wasn't a DV then, it was something like a High 8 or something like that. Shoot on a location, go back and then press the rewind button to see how it worked.
There was a thought of where do we stop thinking about going backwards here, you know, because if we start analyse it too heavily, then, you know, we just won't know when to stop. So let's just stop analysing it now and just do it and go for it, you know?
Yes, I think people were breaking down, getting tearful, not understanding what happened.
So actually preparing for it was quite hard, but shooting for it was really hard because as a director you have a certain geography in your mind. So if you have a shot, for argument's sake, it starts wide and finishes tight, then logically your next shot should start wide so that the two will cut together. Then this shot, which is going to that shot, now that one's backwards. So that one now starts wide and finishes tight, but because you're running it backwards, it's been shot the other way, but it's got to join onto this shot, which has been run forwards, and so, you know, your brain starts to explode.
There's a perfectly rational explanation for all this.
They
were running a tandem, and it was running backwards. So there was 2 shots. That's a good example. There's a shot where they came round the corner from left to right, but then when you run the thing backwards, it went from right to left. And then the next shot was them forwards, cycling, but being pushed backwards, so that their dialogue was forwards, but they were riding backwards. And getting the geography of that, I did actually screw that up, and I had to flip the shot to make it work.
There's always holes like that, you know, when you come to rehearsals, you start thinking, I mean, you got the great, you know, premise and all that, and you think, well, if that can't happen, because if that happened, that would happen, and, you know, so we're always working our way through minefield of sort of continuity, sort of potholes that it's so easy to fall down if you take it. And we've, you know, any Red Dwarf fan will tell you we've fallen down them thousands of times.
So, oh yeah, no, you can get a little keyboard with a sampler on and, you know, sample it and play it backwards to find out how exactly those words sounded backwards. And the thing about backwards was when you heard words backwards, they didn't sound anything like you think they're going to sound.
Some of the stuff that we found out in backwards, you know, you'd think bitter backwards would be ritib or something like that, or retib, but it's not, it's airskib. You know, if I say airskib and you're saying that backwards, that'll say bitter. That's quite weird.
Yo, matey, what's that you drinking there? You know, drinky, beerskip.
Erskip.
Ah, airskip. 2 pints of airskip, please.
Airskip?
2. Was that difficult? No, with a smart party.
We were filmers on the docks, and like Toxteth, just like the other end, you know, just city centre, Toxteth, the docks. So it's just across the city. So I used to nip out whenever I could.
There's always a distraction when you're on location because either where you're filming or, you know, there's if you've got like, especially outside, you've got much more time on your hands because it takes longer to set things up. So, you know, you can stray.
We went to lunch, and because of there being so many vehicles or whatever, we hung all the car keys in the back of the prop van. So all the car keys were there for everybody. And then we came back from lunch and everybody's ready. Now, you've got to imagine it isn't single camera we're shooting here. We've got 5 prop guys, we've got standby chippies, we've got painters, we've got half a ship built, we've got set up for them appearing out of this ship that doesn't exist. Because it's invisible. So we're setting up and we're trying to push along, and I think we got slightly behind. And then it was discovered that Craig and Danny weren't there.
I'm easily led.
Mike Agnew was always very good at having kittens.
I mean, this is only, thinking about it now, we kind of think that they might have borrowed one of the cars and disappeared for a while.
It was lunchtime and there was kind of a few hire cars lying around. So we're in Liverpool and Craig thought maybe we could just do a little tourist jaunt.
But this is now getting on to a half an hour, 40 minutes after we should have started shooting. And they appeared from nowhere. And I went absolutely ballistic. I just went nuts because as a production manager on a BBC show at the time, of course, you were the production manager, the location manager, the unit manager, the first assistant, the floor manager in studio. You did all the jobs and it was expected, that's what you did. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. Now everybody's split up and you'd have lots of different people doing those jobs and it's not quite the same. But then you're doing everything. So you tend to get a bit wound up about stuff, especially when your director is going mad about the schedule.
That was his job, to have kittens and to worry about us. So we made sure he did his job well.
And so I saw Craig and in no uncertain terms, asked him where he had been, quite loudly, and actually running quite fast at him. And he asked me, he just said to me, "What's your problem, Agnew?" And I think the words I used were, "You're my something problem, Craig." At which point he got quite defensive and I got quite aggressive, and it was at that point that Ed appeared out of the truck and stopped me from actually hitting him. Then there were lots of apologies and whatever, and Craig and I get on very well now, but at the time, yes, we had a bit of a moment there.
I wasn't actually there that day because there was a stand-in Crichton in one of those scenes earlier on, and because I can't remember, I think I was working, that was at the kind of very beginning of the shooting, and I had some work that was overlapping, so I couldn't be there that day, so there was I don't know wonder who that stand-in Crichton was. Because I've never been to that lake, wherever they filmed that lake. And there is a shot of Crichton in a speedboat. I was really jealous because I'd never been in one of those at the time.
It was kind of quite dangerous as well, and it was freezing. I'm head to toe, heavy leather gear, and I've got to walk backwards slowly and submerge myself into the lake, but I couldn't really get myself under because, you know, you'd get air bubbles underneath your jacket and stuff like that, so they stuck loads of lead weights and stuff like that in my pockets and down my boots and things like that. And then I walked backwards into the lake again, and I managed to submerge myself. But there was about 12 inches of silt underneath this, you know, at the bottom of this lake, and it was kind of, my boots got stuck in it, and I could hear them, you know, in the distance screaming, "Action, action, action." And I'm trying to sort of I'm trying to get my boots out of the silt so I could sort of start walking, and I'm running out of breath, and I'm thinking, oh God, I hope someone comes and rescues me really, really quickly. But in the end, I kind of managed to sort of get one foot out and manage to get a bit of air, and then just kind of do the scene.
You find anything? Well, the bug's there, but they're not.
You're dry. That's weird.
But the big test with the actor is that they have to stay underwater long enough for the water to become flat. And in the end of the day, you're completely in their hands. You can't going to go, I'll cue you. They're underwater, you know. So, and Craig was great. He hung around underwater for really quite a long time. And the water was completely flat before he re-emerged, you know.
I was in me green git Rimmer outfit with the aerial sticking out of the peak cap, I think, and Robert was Crichton. And the extraordinary thing is, all of Manchester saw these two figures walking backwards, and it was as if nothing odd was happening. They just did not bat an eyelid.
And the universe starts expanding. Eventually, when it's expanded as far as it can, there's the big crunch, right? And everything starts contracting.
That was kind of like one of the biggest ever gags from the cat. When I actually first read it, I actually had to ask them what happened. You know, like what's going on here? And Doug sort of goes, it's a backwards beep. I went, oh right. So I understood fully, you know, what his reaction should have been, and I actually got them to sort of, everything was up, you know, my eyebrows was up, I got them to get the hair up, so everything was just like upwards. And then when he tries to walk, you know, it's still walking upwards rather than forwards, so that's how that funny walk came about.
And Blue Midget, on screen to me, just didn't look like a particularly detailed miniature. It looked like something that had to be made quite quickly. And also the set was very contained and small, and you couldn't really do much on it. We had a chat with Peter Ragg. He went off, and I think at this point it was called White Midget, the craft that we'd written in the script, and he came back with this bug-shaped thing. And we went, oh, it looks like a bug, like it hadn't occurred to Peter that it looked like a bug. And he went, yeah, the guys are calling it Starbug. And we went, oh, that's a good name. Maybe it could be green. And he went, well, that's what I was thinking.
And then it became green as opposed to white, and as is always the case, things never end up as they were intended to originally.
Anti-grav, check. Retro, check. Boosters, check. And very gently, ease forward.
I did my warm-ups actually has a character called the Fabulous Tony, all-round entertainer, and I wore this ludicrous bright green suit. They just said, come and do your character in this show and wear your own suit. I think it was a cost-cutting thing, so that they knew I had a suit, therefore I'd be cheaper to hire. So, yeah, I just did what I normally do. I could say anything I liked because they were just going to spin it all backwards anyway. So that was my finest backwards performance I've ever given, actually.
I've thrown through a plate glass window about 4 times, I think. And I was quite heavy in them days, I was, you know, and the guys had such problems getting me through it. They had to pick me up and launch me.
I think it was probably more than one take. Craig's very game like that. If you chuck him through a window and you think, could be better, he'll do it again. And he's very good. He was always good like that. I always had great admiration for him. He never, ever said, ooh, I'm in agony, I don't think I can do that again. He just got chucked through the window again.
there was no difficulty in persuading Craig to have a go at things.
I love doing all that bit. I mean, that's kind of, you know, I think stuntmen have the best fun of the lot, you know. I mean, you do all the sort of close-ups and all that, and then you let the stuntman go and do all the exciting stuff. I like getting the explosions and all that kind of stuff.
Unrumble!
How can you be ambushed by 5 black holes?
It's always the way, isn't it? We've been in deep space for 3 million years and there hasn't been one. Then all of a sudden, 5 of them turn up at once.
No, I don't want to talk about that one because I'm not in it that much.
The genesis of that, the whole ice thing, was a meeting with Rob and Doug and me and Peter Ragg, the visual effects designer.
Rather than us writing stuff and them trying to deliver what we had written, we wanted to reverse it a bit. And so we met with the vis effects guys and said, what can you do that would look really good? And that's where the snow thing came from Marooned. He said, we do good snow.
I think Peter made the mistake of saying, snow is good. We can do snow.
And I said, obviously it's not snow, what's it actually made of? And he said, soap flakes.
It looked very realistic. Unfortunately, everyone slid around for the next couple of days because we had a nice soapy floor.
Of course, I've got to fall out of the spaceship, land on my back, then start trying to dig my way through, and then just get completely blown into the side of this boulder. And they pulled me on this rope really hard, and you bang, it really hit me back as well. And then you kind of open your mouth, and all these soap. I tasted soap for weeks, man.
I mean, Craig suffered a lot that day as well because he had to climb out of a door and then do a comedy falling down because the wind's so strong fall. He didn't have to do any acting at all. He climbed out the door and the wind just took his feet away. It was very... I mean, they create like 70 or 80 mile an hour winds, those machines, and it's very hard to stand up near them. So.
Credit to Craig, we put him through hell on that and he just kept going, you know. He never gave up, never complained, always got on with it.
That was so bloody painful. I mean, it was more painful for Robert Llewellyn. He had his eyes, his mask was on, but his eyes were glued open.
They had to paint so much makeup to cover the join from the rubber mask to my eyes that they just kind of kept layering it on, which was, you know, if you're sitting like that, it's just having your eyeballs painted. It's not that terrible. Not your eyelids, not your eyeballs. Luckily, they didn't paint my eyeballs. That would have been very bad. But what happened then when I opened my eyes, my eyelids got basically stuck. So I was like that. So I couldn't really blink, you know, which is, you know, not pleasant, but it's not horrible until someone actually blows soap flakes into your face from a huge fan. This is the engine of a Volkswagen with a propeller on it, with a kind of guard round. That's a wind machine. So they start out this thing, and the wind starts. They go, all right, everybody ready? Then they pour soap flakes into the wind, and it creates an instant blizzard. Brilliant effect. But there's me going, with foaming eyes.
A pint of lager just didn't taste the same that night. It was just like, you know, you were blowing bubbles.
Still snowing, is it?
I mean, you're head to toe in leather. You got a fire there. You got all the lights. You're sweating your hairies off, and you're supposed to be.
I decided to shoot the entire show handheld. So apart from some of the ice stuff, everything in the studio, everything in Starbug was shot handheld. And to my knowledge, that was the first sitcom that had ever been shot handheld.
That's it, there's nothing else.
Just a pot noodle. Oh, and I found a tin of dog food in the tool cupboard.
Well, it's obvious what gets eaten last then, isn't it? Can't stand pot noodles.
And it's a very powerful story. It's a very good story that people could identify with because it was to do with, you know, you can understand being stuck in the middle of nowhere and you haven't got anything to eat. You're going to die. You know, it's a great thrust to get that story going. And so all that claustrophobia really helped it, and it really made it look great.
I thought that was some of our best work in the early ones. Our finest hour, as it were.
I think it's my second favourite, probably, of all Red Dwarfs, you know. And just to do to read the dialogue for the first time was just one of those moments as an actor. You just sort of, you know, great, I can't wait to do this.
I used to play golf. I hate people who abuse the facilities. Hope you rake the sand back nicely before you... That would be a hell of a lie to get into, wouldn't it? Competition the next day, your ball lands in Lister's buttock crevice. You need more than a niblick to get that one out.
I was going to say I've got a big bump.
Big? It's like two badly parked Volkswagens.
I think Marooned is my favourite episode in terms of, you know, the way that those guys played it and the way that we experimented with a style of shooting.
I loved Marooned. I just think if ever we did a Red Dwarf stage play, I'd love to do Marooned as it, because it's just like, basically it's a two-hander, you know, and great dialogue, great stories.
It was a long episode for those two, you know, to be funny, sitting around a fire in a studio with an audience, with a fire going, you know, 5 handheld cameras, cameramen leaning over each other.
My favourite shot from the whole sequence inside Starbug was Craig had to eat a bit of dog food, and he got the spoon the spoon out with the dog food on the end of it, and he's going to put it into his mouth. And as he did it, the camera moved in to Craig to the point where actually the end of the camera, I think, hit the end of his hand as he put it into his mouth. As a result, you get this great wide-angle, grotesque shot of somebody. You're following the dog food into his mouth.
I'm sure the dog food will be lovely.
Remember, this isn't dog food. This is a piece of prime fillet steak in blue cheese sauce. It's been charcoal broiled in garlic butter and is going to taste delicious. 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 Well, now I can see why dogs lick their testicles. It's to take away the taste of the food.
That wasn't really dog food. I've said it was and all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't really dog food. I actually don't know what it was, but it was horrible anyway. They had a tuna stuff all mixed on, and then he put like marrowbone jelly on the top, which was like probably scraped from the side of a tin of Spam or something like that, you know.
And it was great because it was disgusting, it was slimy, it was all teethy, and it was funny, you know, and that's a difficult combo to get, but he always used to manage to do it somehow.
The polymorph model, yes, bane of my life. It was created and operated using cable controls, so it was what we refer to as animatronic.
And then, of course, as a director, you go, that's great, now I'd like it to scuttle up and down the thing and to take off and fly, you know, and they'll go, well, it can't, we didn't make it to do that. And you go, oh, God, it must be able to scuttle around, always asking too much. And, of course, you know, the great thing about people like Peter is he always give it a go.
At the end of the day, it worked, but it wasn't without its sweating brows and a few curses.
Yeah, well, I used to swear a lot anyway. I like swearing, so, you know, it was nothing personal to the polymorph.
I only did that because it's one of the moves I can do. But I had that, I looked like I was in Cameo. Remember that band Cameo, Word Up? Because I had this big sort of jock strap outside my leathers and all that to protect my sacred love spuds.
Snake! 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 It was a big snake, so its head was kind of that size. And when it yawned, she said, oh, don't worry, that's just yawns. It went... and this enormous mouth opened, and the little pointy tongue thing came out, and she sniffed me. She was a bit confused by the rubber head, and she was doing this. And I sort of, that head's, and you try and push a snake's head away, thinking, that's a bit close. And they don't move. And you go, and it just wants to stay there, and then it goes, you get that look. You get the squashed Crichton look. So she gives you a little squeeze, you knew it. And that, I mean, I think there is a kind of 1 second shot of Tina around my neck. I mean, it's so brief. And the hours I spent with Tina trying to kind of bond. There were 2 women, one woman who looked after her and her friend were there with the snake in a box. And when I'm not in costume, you know, I've got to get as cool as I can. So I walked into the room they were in a pair of grey socks, underpants and a rubber head. And they were much more frightened of me.
Look, just because it's an armour-plated alien killing machine that salivates unspeakable slobber doesn't mean it's a bad person.
Yeah, I just sort of, you know, picked up on, you know, many of these sort of Morris Minor driving peace people that we'd seen at Greenham and just sort of exaggerated it, brought in a bit of hippiness, you know, and off we went. The beard and the makeup were, you know, the glasses and everything. That sort of Rolf Harris look-alike.
We then changed it when Chris came up with the Peacenik as a character. I can't remember what the original character was in it, and then we just let him rip and wrote notes down of stuff he was saying. And it was like such a scary thing because it's like, oh my God, if you open this out, they'll be wanting to do this every week and there'll just be mayhem as everyone goes, I'll just have my part this week. But it was really kind of quite contained and good. And so Chris just went blur and did loads of stuff. And then we wrote it down and then went away and reshaped and reworked some of the things he said and put it in the script. And I think that's one of the few real scenes, you know, where it's been kind of thrown out to the floor, as it were. So that's quite interesting, and I think one of the best things we ever did, probably.
Where have you been? Let's go! I've been getting myself comfortable, man.
That was good because, you know, I got to wear my hair out. I didn't have to go through all the shampoo and set that day.
I am so sorry, sir.
Just forget it.
Oh, how can I forget it, sir? I compared your mother to a foolish, aged, blubbery fish. I said she was a simple-minded, scaly old piscine. I intimated she was an ugly, lungless marine animal with galloping senility. A putrid, amphibious gill breather with less brains than a mollusk.
Forget it.
The blubbery fish, what an agonising thing. I definitely wore a sort of channel in the tiles on my kitchen floor trying to learn that speech. It was a groove, you know, if you spilt any soup on the kitchen floor, it always rolled into that point. It was so, I don't know why it was, I think it's the lists. I think that Rob and Doug realised that, you know, if they really wanted to give me a bad time, give me a list which almost repeats itself, doesn't it? And it was a brilliant speech. It was such a funny speech. So they wrote down you know, idiot boards which they didn't want the audience to see. We were doing it in front of an audience, so they were all turned away from the audience. And we got into the scene and started doing it. And I hadn't even thought about it then. It was just like next scene. Oh, Chris! I go in with Chris. Given that I knew the first bit, and then I got to the I'm so sorry, I called you. And all the idiot boards were still turned round. And then there was a lovely man called Mike Agnew, who was the floor manager, crawling on his hands and knees between my legs. It's the only way he could get in there. While we were doing the shot, to try and turn them around. And in fact, what you see is me doing that speech without seeing it, because I couldn't see them. So I actually could do it. It was a confidence thing, you know. I actually did know the damn thing.
With digital tape now, what you can do is take 3 elements and take them away and slap them together in the edit. But in those days, because it was 1-inch tape and you kept dropping a generation every time you try to add another layer of pictures onto the tape, we had to try and do it in the gallery, so as we were shooting it. So inevitably you'd have a piece of tape. It's called roll back and mix. It's very good. It worked really, really well. So I'd have the background piece of genius, which would be Mel's, a piece of Mel's set. Then I'd have the next layer piece of genius, which was Peter Ragg's Monster. And then the next layer piece of genius was 3 actors, and they all were separate entities. Yeah, it did work. It did work, but it could only be done live, so you'd have to run the piece of tape and the actors have to watch what they're doing, and then up would come the monster, and then they would come and it was all a question of coordinating timing. We did a lot of that. We got quite good at it in the end.
Didn't know you could do that.
Oh yes, I can plug a number of add-ons into my groinal socket, allowing me to perform virtually any household task imaginable.
The only place you could really put it, because if you put it anywhere else, it seemed even more rude. But having it there just seemed to fit the bill.
So you just like stick the head whisk attachment on the end and you can like whip up a Spanish omelette?
I certainly can, sir. But it's amazing how few people are prepared to eat them.
He actually has the components of an old vacuum cleaner that I had at home. We took the hose attachment out and sprayed it up to match his jacket. And it was done in a live studio audience. And we'd done a sort of rehearsal, and the crew had really laughed and thought it was fantastic. And we didn't think anything about it.
I now think I remember it because I've remembered it so much, but it was an extraordinary event. At that stage in my career, if you can call it that, you know, I'd appeared on thousands of stages in comedy shows, and so I'd worked with live audiences who laugh a lot when it went well, who walked out when it didn't. You know, so I was used to that kind of atmosphere. But I never remember having to stop doing something because we couldn't hear each other. I mean, you know, we were all of 5 feet apart, Craig and I couldn't hear anything he was saying because the audience were in such a hysterical state.
We were screaming our lines at each other, but the noise was so much that we couldn't actually hear what each other was saying. So it was just a case of just waiting for his lips to stop and then hoping that that was the right cue for me to say my bit. And he was doing exactly the same thing. But, I mean, it was a riotous reception.
And by this time, the audience were laughing so much that I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear dialogue, I couldn't hear cameras couldn't hear me. The nature of directing these things is that it's all communication. And the whole communication had broken down because the audience had gone so nuts.
Something very, very... Just a little pain in the gut. What's wrong? Oh, my underpants are shrinking! Oh, God! The book's alive, man! I'm getting smaller! Oh, no! Help me, please! Please, I'm begging you!
I mean, really, the characters are so good that the audience would just know, they would know often a character's reaction because they just were into the characters so much and the characters were so well-rounded.
And then Chris has to come in behind me with his sort of punchline, which I had no idea if he'd come in. I couldn't see him, I couldn't hear it.
I knew I'd have to ride the laugh, but it wasn't, I mean, I certainly knew I'd have to wait a long time for the laugh to stop. But of course, I waited long enough. You know, I thought, hang on, how many more minutes of this episode can I waste just looking at you know, just waiting for the line to happen, you know? So I just jumped in, really, even when the laugh was still at sort of fever pitch level.
Say I'm totally shocked.
They didn't even get the full edit. You know, that scene was cut down by about half to what the laugh really was, I think.
Keep that safe. It's Lister's mind.
It was impossible to do in front of an audience because Chris's voice had to come out of Craig's mouth and Craig's voice had to come out of Chris's, yeah.
No Welshing.
Of course not.
Get a guide track on one, and then the next time they did it silent, I think, as I recall, so that we could get the background, all the movement, the Foley. So, otherwise that's a nightmare to create.
I had to do a line, and then Craig would go, and I'd have to not only know what my response was, because I couldn't hear him, because he couldn't say it, because then Chris would dub his voice into that, you know. You can imagine a man who's only got this flimsiest grip of his lines. I think there was quite a long time spent in the studio that day. Just as well there wasn't an audience, they'd have all thrown themselves off the seating.
They'd always tell you, you know, leave the gap there, because you're gonna get a laugh there. And you'd probably, where? Oh, there, yeah. You sure? Yeah.
It looked very good. And because John Pumphrey was given an opportunity then to light it without having to worry about an audience being there. So if you look at that series, you'll see that There's a lot of very clever and an interesting lighting in that particular episode.
I sort of just did a straight impersonation of Craig, and it was fun to do, you know. I don't think he sort of, well, he'll be the first to admit that he didn't do a sort of fully fledged impersonation of me, but I knew if I'd got the mouth, you know, his, you know, sort of mouth movements as much as possible.
I'm no impressionist whatsoever, and I'm not that good at voices either. So that was a really worrying week for me. It was a really, really hard work for me that week. Just trying to keep up with Chris's level of mimicry, really, you know.
Chris's impression of Craig physically was really quite good, spot on, in fact. But when you came to revoicing, Craig's impression of Chris fitting into his mouth was perfect. So they both had different strengths. So I don't think you can say that one was better than the other. They were great in their individually for different reasons.
It was difficult for Chris because I speak a lot quicker than Chris speaks, and so he's got to get his rimmer in, you know, be rimmer in a shorter space of time because I speak quicker. Whereas, but I was really good at sort of hitting the marks in the lip sync studio, so it actually does look like my voice is coming out of Chris when he's speaking, which is it's confusing. And when you're watching it, you start getting confused because you start thinking that's him when it's me, you know, and that's me when it's him.
If you watch it sometimes, occasionally my voice goes sort of almost impersonates him, you know, when I'm doing me, just once or twice, you know, I'm the only one who can hear that, but I mean, but it was fun. I thought it worked out very well.
Robert's first day was absolute hell.
We were in a sauna, which was a scene that wasn't used. We were in a sauna, the entire crew in t-shirts and shorts, and Crichton in full rubber. And I had the electric lighting finger to light candles for Lister's bloated out dinner. And I was going to light the candles by just going, and my finger would kind of, you know, the flame would come out of my finger. And so that was the electronics from a little electric cigarette lighter that were fitted inside the glove, and with, you know, the gas tube coming out there. It was beautifully done. Peter Ragg made it. And then the actual cylinder of the gas was down my sleeve, and there was electronics, and he was behind me with the switch to switch it. And it was all marvellous, and it worked. We tried it beforehand, and it went, wow, it's a flame. It's really clever.
As always, I tried it on myself first to be sure that it was safe and nothing could possibly go wrong.
I don't know how he survived that. Yeah, that was hot, that room. I mean, you walked in there, and even if you weren't doing anything, you were just sweating.
On the day, I was sweating sort of, I would think, 4.5 gallons an hour. It wasn't pleasant. So I was very damp inside. And Peter said I had a cut on my finger. I don't quite remember that, but certainly my hands were in a damp condition. So that the 2 bits of bare wire for this really micro low voltage lighter, because it's not a big voltage, it's a little spark. Every time he switched the switch, I go, let me light the candle. And I get this huge electric shock because it was direct contact to wet skin. And everything just compounded to make life extremely unpleasant.
Robert yelped and leapt 5 foot in the air and called me a few names, most of it under his breath, I have to say.
And all this time, Craig was lying in a lovely jacuzzi, reading a women muscle magazine, smoking a cigar, having a whale of a time. He's going, what's the matter, Bobby? It's fine. Just floating there for hours. Well, there's all these technicians trying to get this electronic finger to work.
This is what I call training.
Paul Jackson, the man who'd originally seen the play that I was in, who was there that day, and I sort of collapsed on a stairwell in the sauna going, I think I'm a bit hot. You know, you don't even register it, your brains cook. I didn't feel ill, I just sort of fell over. And he was sort of looking at me going, yeah, bet you're glad I saw that play now.
It was such a confusion episode to film. And then when I went like that and got all the into the mashed potato and poured the gravy over my head, the mashed potato wasn't properly mashed. There was big hard lumps of it, and all the lumps went up my nose, and it was horrible. It was like a really uncomfortable episode to do that.
It's strange. People always think that the directors direct the miniatures, and it's not true. It's mostly not true on film, and it certainly wasn't true on Red Dwarf. Heat Rag and his guys would go off, and they would shoot the sequence, and then, you know, we would see rushes as they came off. But in terms of storyboarding or camera angles, they were pretty much left entirely to their own devices. And then, you know, would give us the shots.
If you shoot at 120 frames a second, you're shooting at 5 times normal speed. So everything takes 5 times longer to happen. So it adds weight.
With the small budget that we had, we were being kind of insanely ambitious by kind of cram all this stuff in, but there wasn't the time or the money really to do it.
Stop saying everything's crypto-fascist. Make me sound like I was a complete git.
Look, I'm not breaking up the band. Music is my life.
My brother Emil played me as a young man in Time Slides, yeah. It's one of my best weeks, you know. He'd just done that film, The Fruit Machine, and with Robbie Coltrane, and so he'd done a bit of acting before.
He was lovely, Craig's brother, really sweet. And he was in this sort of, yeah, completely glam rock. It was everything from sweet teenage rampage. He had platform boots and very tight trousers and this bomber jacket and wild afro hair and a collar that he could have taken off with.
One of the first songs I ever wrote. It was called
I think he did really well in it, you know, because he had a much less lived-in voice and all that kind of stuff. So it did genuinely sort of appear that it could be me as a younger person, you know, because the voice was younger and stuff like that, and he still had that sort of idealism in his eyes.
That's Frank. It's my brother's wedding.
Basically, you create a wipe, and then you can take the inside of that picture out and replace it with another one, and that's how we set up the bulk of the slides. The bit where he fell out of the photograph had been filmed at least a month more earlier than when he fell on the ground. But not only that, it was written, Rob and Doug, you know, testing the barriers, it was written so that he said half a word the month earlier and the second half of the word later. So I think it was fan-smegging-tastic.
Smegging. Incredible.
And then once we kind of, you sold the idea, so you go, right, that works. Everyone understands the concept of walking in and out of a photograph. Then you can allow the comedy to work really well. So Craig throws a snowball out of the picture. Danny catches it, throws it back, hits him in the face. Massive laugh.
We just made him like a sort of rock star. We made him as Lister would be if he had wads of cash, and it was the whole thing with his stretch limo and, you know, big cigar and, you know, just the whole sort of rock and roll elements. But, you know, he did have a Wilma Flintstone T-shirt.
Ed had said to me, because I wanted to direct, he said, why don't you direct this scene?
Psst, wake up.
What is it?
And then I sat down in the big chair in the centre of the console, and everyone's there waiting on your every word. And in walked Ed By, Paul Jackson, Rob Grant, Doug Naylor.
Now, have you got all that?
I think so.
Then my camera script got changed. Almost entirely. I mean, out of all proportion. Just by the odd, oh, why don't you do it like that? And why don't you do it like that? And whatever. And it wasn't until afterwards, sort of looking back at it, I went, that's not what I wanted to do at all. But actually, it was probably 300% better than anything I could have done.
Your Crichton Series 3 mechanoid is now reaching the end of its useful service life. It can hardly have escaped your attention that he's slow, stupid, crudely designed, and quite amazingly ugly. He needs replacing.
Things would crop up during a rehearsal time, or, you know, an idea would happen sort of pretty much overnight, and I think this was one of them, that suddenly we'd have this alternate Crichton.
I knew Rob and Doug a bit through two other guys in Absolute and the kind of the comedy mafia that happens. So I'd known them before, but they sort of said, we'd like you to do this part, and I didn't even go, I didn't have a casting, which was, at that stage of my career, was very, very unusual. In fact, at this stage of my career, it's very unusual.
Crichton, you're not dead. You should be dismantled and ready to leave.
the background and kind of the fringe and stuff, you tend to make things yourself. So I literally was sitting there the night before going, I have no idea why they've asked me to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I suddenly thought, what's the voice that's not like me? Because they can't want a Scottish big Jesse kind of robot. What would that? So I started talking like that, and I said, "Oh, that's okay. That might work." So so I did that. The problem being that I can only really do that for about 10 seconds at a time. So by the end of the read through, my vocal cords were lying in a bloody mess on the table. But they were terribly impressed. That was the great thing. They were cock-a-hoop about it, and they said, "No, this is a great voice." And I said, well, "That's very kind."
And 10 times stronger.
We'd meet at the BBC for our tech rehearsal, and I went to the costume store and literally grabbed a whole load of stuff, studded gloves, and there was a crash helmet, there was this sort of, we had a sort of a gorilla breastplate. There was a complete mishmash of anything and everything.
Going into this room where Howard, more in optimism than anything else, had come up with this fantastic costume that was, it was just the simplicity of the design and the kind of the way that he'd done it. It was like, you know, when you see those documentaries in Star Wars where they say we couldn't find an eye for C-3PO, but we found this air vent that somebody had thrown away, and suddenly that was right. And it was you sort of got the feeling that Howard was doing that on a daily basis.
We went up to Manchester, and I think overnight I sort of literally put this thing together. And as Gordon came in, we literally added more or less or whatever, and came up with the Hudson, which worked fantastically well.
It looked like very, very good metal, but it was actually made of very, very thin and, as it turned out, rather sharp plastic. So there was, once I put it on, there was a range of movements I could do, which actually helped the character, I think, probably. The character. My God, that's a hefty thing to say. Because you couldn't move in any way like a human being at all.
He had great big platform Herman Munster boots, which made him about 8 foot tall. And it was just all those elements, and it was literally creating on the spot.
It was very, very frightening in it. They gave him these massive big boots, heels that high. He was like ginormous in it.
A very rude man.
Dying time. First time they gave me a shotgun in that. Have you noticed? I've got a shotgun. I've got an old-fashioned, sort of like, well, old-fashioned in Red Dwarf terms, sort of 20th century shotgun, which I've never used since, and I'd never used before. Where did it come from? Where did it go?
I used to do quite a lot of science at school, so I said, trust me, that will be all right. And I kind of just wrote various, I think, I may be completely wrong about that. I'm sure I'm exaggerating my role in the whole creative process here.
10 times faster than any droid on the market.
It was sort of early days of this stuff where basically, literally what happened was the camera was locked off, and I did the thing, I came to the end of it, and everyone stood still, and they just took the chicken, I put the other chicken back, and did it, and it was all fine. Very weird, but it was, no, but that was very good fun. And again, that gave me a lot of confidence, because it was a pre-record day, people started laughing when you were doing it, and it just makes such a difference, because it is weird when you come in to do one thing, and in something like this, it's sort of the royal family of sitcoms. You know, you kind of doffing your cap to people, and if they laugh, you kind of think, well, that's okay, you're doing the right thing.
Is that the way you want it?
It's the way it is.
Then you better leave an address with your body, so I can mail it to your head.
In fact, there's two fantastic things about the makeup. A, I wasn't Robert, which was absolutely fantastic. It was very bizarre. The cast were just so happy, generally on a daily basis, not being Robert, apart from Robert, obviously, because he was Robert. And everyone else, if ever you were feeling down, you just looked across at the lunch table, you saw this man trying to eat without moving his face.
It must have taken, 20 minutes. Poor man, he suffered. And a really butch costume. He looked really butch.
With a bit of mascara and a beard.
Robert was so bloody jealous. I want that for next season. I want that. The amount of time I spent listening to Robert Llewellyn moaning about his mask.
And he had this tube down the back of his head for the sweat kind of duct. I mean, it was... Anyway. So that was very good. But also, they made me up to be very tanned, and they completely hollowed my cheeks out. I kind of looked like Ian Glenn for the one and only time in my life I was ever going to look chiseled in film movie like. And it was extraordinary. I mean, I saw stills and it worked. As soon as I moved, you could see it was makeup, unfortunately. But the stills were fantastic.
Don't tell Robert. That's what he'll want.
Oh, it's a computer chip. Oh, it's a 5517/W13 Alpha Sim modem. Oh, it's the interface circuit with a built-in 599 XRDP. Oh, how did you know?
Intuition.
Originally, Holly didn't get anything for Crichton in Last Day, and I thought, oh, Hollywood, you know, Hollywood? Hey, Hollywood.
My goodness, I do believe I'm drunk. I suddenly feel the need to strut my funky stuff.
Sit down, it's the booze, you're not used to it.
We were only acting, unfortunately. I did suggest that we should do it method-wise and just all get completely wrecked and then do it. Somehow, BBC, insurance, all that kind of stuff, being pissed in the studio, they don't like it, you know.
I think they were, but I think they've had quite a lot of practice. And I mean, I'm not very good at it. I have been drunk in my life, but I'm very bad at it. I'm a very cheap date, and I can get drunk on half a sort of lager shandy. You know, in fact, quite a weak shandy. So, I mean, I was sort of doing quite bad drunk acting, which was very appropriate for Crichton, thank goodness.
Not during the course, definitely afterwards, but not during the course, as far as I know.
And they just like lie back and accept it.
You know, there was an awful lot of moaning going on as well. Robert was, you know, and from Hattie as well. Hattie was moaning. Hattie wanted an episode that featured, you know, heavily hair because she had a small character. And, Robert wanted an episode that featured him, and it was easier to do one featuring Robert first because he's so accomplished, you know. And by the time we got to Last Day, he was flying, you know.
He just fit into the sort of network of characters really well. A lot of that's to do with the writing, obviously, but his level of performance and the way he interacted with the other characters just worked really, really well. So he had a kind of chemistry that you knew you could exploit.
As Crichton is being written and as Robert's performing it, you can see Doug's eyes just opening wide and think, God, I've got to smash here, you know. This character's, you know, you could see it building all the time, and you could see Crichton building all the time.
It very quickly became one of the most popular characters, you know. I mean, you know, even overtaking me and Chris, you know, in some people's estimations, you know, because it's a fantastically thought out, excellently crafted and brilliantly acted character, you know.
Don't give me the Star Trek crap. It's too early in the morning.
Me and Crichton were both new for Series 3, well, as us anyway. Yeah, I always wondered about whether I was going to get death threats or something, but luckily I didn't. If I did, they were diverted, which I don't know if that's worse, not to know about them, but no, it seemed to be all right.
I mean, by the time we recorded The Last Day, which was the last episode we recorded of Series 3, you know, I'd really kind of got to know this little group of people. I mean, you know, very much centred on the cast, but also everybody else outside it, Rob and Doug, the writers, and Ed, the director, and all the, you know, Mel Bibby, Peter Ragg, all that crowd. You know, it is a very intense, enclosed little working environment. You get very close to them. And you have to, because it's kind of trench humour that goes on, you've got to get through this insane job. Everybody's got, you know, if you haven't got a rubber head on, you've got weird teeth in, a funny H, or your head's sewn up with that, or you're sitting with a neck brace, you can't move, you know. I mean, we all had our bit to carry.
We always expected never to come back, I think.
I was kind of depressed because I thought, what a brilliant job. I really enjoyed doing it, and it's the last one we'll ever do, because it was, at that time, the end of the series. We've done 3 series, we never expected to do any more. Big party that night for all the people who've been in it.
Every last episode made you paranoid. You think, is this the last one?
I don't think I felt that, because, I mean, I thought this show has many series left in it, but maybe 1 or 2, you know, but I didn't think, something told me that I just didn't think it was the end of Red Dwarf as a television show at the time, you know?
When you look back at certain bits, you go, oh, that was good, that we pulled that off. And that's kind of technical stuff that was challenging then. Wouldn't be so difficult now, but it was then.
I've always said that one of the main reasons that kept me in that rubber head was the writing. The writing of those series is exquisite. I mean, you know, and it's stood the test of time. I think I really admired it at the time, but wasn't sure exactly what it was. I didn't, you know, it's very hard to, as you're working on it, to see really what it is, the quality of that. But it was hard to learn. And other actors that are proper actors that have been in the show have said this is really hard to learn because they don't use any cliches. And any actor, as you learn lines, there'll be, you know, even things like dry as a bone or, you know, stitch in time says, like, you know, whatever, all those things, little tiny language hooks help you learn something. There are none in Red Dwarf. There's nothing to grip onto. It's a very shiny, polished orb of joy.
We were always progressing forward all the time. You kind of thought, when you finished that particular series, you go, nah, this is okay, this is surely this has got to keep going, you know. Different time then too, the BBC were more, what's the word, rich.